this computer. Good evening, everyone. This is IMG Research Academy. In IMG Research Academy, we talk all things research. We look for ways to see how we can demystify clinical research. We have physicians cut across the globe, from India to US, China, down to South America, everywhere. We're basically interested in research and how we can, contribute our quota to, to improve healthcare and also to help our career trajectory. Our membership is way over 600 plus, and then we're growing in strength. And every day we learn. Every Sunday we come together to learn one little thing or another about clinical research. Because of the volume of the clinical research that are involved, there's need to peer review what we do. And some of our members are signing up for peer review, and it's important to discuss what peer review is. After this peer review session, we're going to talk about a case report that one person needs help with, and we're looking for like 5 people to support. The timeline for that case report is 2 weeks, nothing more than 2 weeks. That case report must be submitted in 2 weeks. Again, we're not representing our institutions. Many of us are either residents or applicants or students. We're not representing our institution. Everything we share here is purely personal opinion and subject to improvement. And then in no way do we lay claims to completeness of our information. So we're constantly growing and seeking for how to grow. What is a peer review? When you do a scientific presentation or a scientific data or a scientific manuscript or scientific draft or paper, part of the ways to validate that paper is to give it to another peer. A peer means someone that is like you, above you, or within your niche, to look at that paper and fact check or validate what you have done, right? So there's several definitions out there in the public. One of the ones I picked was the process by which a scholarly work is evaluated by an expert. And an expert does not necessarily mean one person sitting in Harvard University looking at it, right? As long as you've had a basic training in research or basic training within that niche, like for example, a typical expert like a physician who's fact-checking another physician's work, a specialist who's fact-checking another specialist's work, right? So those are called peer reviews, right? So the objective is to ensure that quality and credibility are sustained. Of course, you know that in medicine, we don't play with quality and credibility. So when the process of peer review was introduced several years ago, when I was reading about history, when people were bringing out their own opinion, we needed to make sure that these opinions are quality and are credible by bringing someone else to look at it and say, this is what it should be. There are different types of peer reviews. One of them is single-blinded review. Single-blinded review is where when you submit the paper either to your supervisor, to the journal, or to the organization that you belong, there's a manuscript that you've written, they assign it to another peer, another professional, another expert to look at it. That professional, right, knows your identity, knows who you are and your capacity of writing, but you don't know that professional, right? So that's called single blind review. And that professional will eventually, go through your manuscript to determine if it is credible or not. It has its own downsides. One of them is reviewers' bias. For example, we've seen reviewers' bias happen in several spheres. People from developed countries kind of have reviewer bias about authors from developing countries, which is understandable, right? Reviewers from experts, more superior institutions may have bias against writers from very less or unknown institutions, right? So that brought about the new change called the double-blinded review, so that we'll cut off all those biases. In the double-blinded review, when you submit your paper to a journal, to your club, to your society, to your supervisor, or whatever you want to submit that paper that you've written. They redact your name and they send it to an expert. So you don't know who's reviewing you, and the expert doesn't know who's actually writing those manuscripts. So eventually, both of you are double-blinded, and that significantly cut down the volume of bias that happens during peer review period. If you look through the history of peer review, you see that a lot of things have happened in the past. Sometimes writers are rejected just based on their name. Writers are rejected based on their institution or country of origin, or maybe not even only country of origin. Even in the US, the institution they come from, they'll be like, oh, he came from Mr. XYZ University, Mr. XYZ, for some unknown reason is not credible, and then they'll reject the manuscript, or they'll reject the paper. So this double blinded review actually helped a lot to reduce many of those unfounded or unsubstantial biases that happen during peer review processes. And then there's this open review. Open review, a typical example of an open review is after I publish or before I publish, there's something they call preprint. In a preprint, before I publish, I post my paper on the preprint website, right? Let me give you an example of a preprint website. Preprint. I'm not advertising anyone, but they're very well for publishing. Publishing preprints, and there's so many of them, right? Preprints. University of Melbourne, and then there's so many of them that have those preprints. So you post your papers there, and then peers from all over the world will see the paper and then begin to criticize or recommend or critique or evaluate or fact check what you've sent. That is also another credible way of conducting peer review. And then there's post-publication review, which many journals do. After you publish your article, people come to your article and make comments and then review it. That has also happened to so many of our articles. They point out areas where we needed to strengthen the article. They point out areas where there were flaws in the article. They point out areas where there were strengths or weaknesses in the article. And then that gives you a new idea on, okay, when you're writing your next article, how you're going to peer review it. So the objectives, as I've mentioned, assess the validity, quality, and originality of the research, improve the manuscript through constructive feedbacks, ensure the research is significant and relevant to the field. I've explained this, in terms when I was discussing in the introduction part of this peer review. So for our members, it's important that you understand that when you're peer reviewing a paper, you play a very significant role in helping to improve the validity and the quality of that paper. It's not just an exercise to run through a paper and then have a peer reviewer certification that you've done peer review. It's also a point where you contribute to the improvement of humanity by catching those little errors or those blind spots that the author may have missed, or probably bogus claims, or areas where the author would have strengthened his research or his article. Having said that, there are steps to do this, practical steps, because in IMG Research Academy, we try to make these things very easy and very, very simplified. If you receive a paper to peer review, or if a journal or an editor sends you a paper, how do they even get to know you? Before we get to sending you a paper, you can sign up to many journals to be a peer reviewer. So you go to the journal, send them an email, I want to be a peer reviewer, and then you send your credentials, they will verify you, and then eventually they'll begin to send you manuscripts to peer review. For us, we do two-step peer review in IMG Research Academy. We do an internal peer review where I send it blinded to another member in the group, and the person reads it and peer reviews it before we send it to the editors. That's why we often call for peer reviewers. Hey, who wants to peer review our paper? And then we want you to be as objective as possible. Don't cut corners. Don't do anything substandard. Just be as objective as possible and provide your constructive feedback. So when the editors or your supervisor or whoever sends you a paper to peer review, most of the time we usually use this double-blinded review system where we don't know you. We hope not to know you so that you can do an unbiased work. First thing to do is to confirm that you can do this peer review. And we also ask all reviewers to remember that publication is timed, right? We don't want to spend 3 years peer reviewing a paper, neither do you want to spend, 2 days. So find out what is the time frame from the journal and do your best to create time to review that paper. The processes are quite simple. You cannot peer review a paper if you don't really understand that paper. So the first thing is make sure that you're peer reviewing a paper where you have the expertise. Good evening, everyone. Final call for everyone to put their video cameras on. Please, if you're just joining us, we need you to put your video cameras on wherever you are. Kids are welcome. Family is welcome to join. If you're driving, put your camera on. We want to see your beautiful car and the crosses wherever you are. Okay, back to what I was saying. So you read through and thoroughly read through and understand the paper, because that will now give you an idea of the feedbacks that you're going to give. Don't just begin to critique the first statement, right? First, read the paper, understand the scope, and then you set out. So I've been doing peer review for over 8 to 9 years, and I've set a system for myself. This may vary from journal to journal, from person to person, but one of the systems that work for me is the systematic approach of peer reviews, right? After you read through, then the first thing you ask yourself is, does this title that the author, that author that you're reviewing the paper for, does it actually reflect what they're saying? Because sometimes titles can be misleading. I could say Satolol poisoning, but in the body of the paper, I'm talking about Satolol intake, right? So you make notes, and as you're doing those peer review, you make notes so that you can send those constructive feedback back. So does it title accurately reflect the content of the paper? The next thing is to look at the abstract, right? For you to peer review an abstract, you should actually know what an abstract is for. An abstract is almost like a mini summary of the entire process and the results of the paper. An abstract should contain a small descriptive overview, the objective of the study, the methodology of the study, your findings, and then your conclusion. That's the basic content of an abstract. So if the abstract doesn't contain these 5 things, it's also your duty as a peer reviewer to say, hey, conclusion didn't match, or there was no conclusion, or there was no methodology, or there was no overview. So when I read your abstract, I should have an idea of what the entire paper is. So as a peer reviewer, your duty is to make sure the abstract is strengthened, that each component reflects what it should reflect within the system. And then after evaluating the abstract, the next thing you do is you, give me 1 second. Thank you. After evaluating the abstract, the next thing you do is to look at the introduction, the basic contents that an introduction should have, right? Did it state the research problem or the objectives clearly written? Look at the comprehensive review of relevant literatures, if they were clearly done. And then you evaluate the methodology. What should be the methodology for this type of study that this person is presenting? Right? And was it clearly stated what the methodology is? We encourage every scientist to state what their methodology is. The reason why we kind of want to emphasize that you state what your methodology is because science should be reproducible, because it's not magic, right? It should be reproducible. If you're doing a systematic review, another person should be able to reproduce a systematic review and probably validate or refute your finding of that systematic review if you are doing a prospective design or retrospective design. So as a reviewer, you pay attention to what method was it done. If it wasn't stated, please highlight it. And also, if it was stated, was the method actually done properly? Because there's a proper way for each methodologies. We've taught different methodologies of research in this academy. And then you look at the result, different areas of the result that you need to review. Was the result presented clearly? Was it presented logically? You know, there are some people who did very fantastic work, but they don't know how to present it, right? I usually say, tell all members within our group, ensure that you use diagrams, flow charts, tables, pictures, images, because a picture speaks 1,000 words and they're easier to remember, especially in the results section. Disabuse or reduce the use of complexities, complex graphs and charts. I mean, for us in IMG Research Academy, why are you even writing a research if somebody cannot simply look at your result and just understand, okay, confidence interval is this, percentage that was, the percentage debt was this, you know, straightforward. A result should be straight and simple. It shouldn't be complex with different charts that are so very cumbersome to understand. So as a reviewer, point it out if those results were not clear and logically done. And there's so many things about result. Consistency in presenting 2 decimal points should be 2 decimal points. If you're using 1 decimal point, should be 1 decimal point. If you're using abbreviation, it should be spelled out clearly. Legends should be spelled out clearly. Title of the table should, you know, reflect what the table contains. And so many things about result segments. The statistical method that you use in arriving at your result should be clearly stated. If the statistical method is not there, or it should be clearly stated. For some data, for some research like simple case report that don't require statistical method, it should be clearly stated as a case report or a case series or whatnot. All right, and then many reviewers are not statisticians, but it's important to also look at statistical implications of whatever you're trying to present. As a reviewer, you should have at least basic knowledge of what is significant and what is insignificant, right? Like 0.05 p-value should be less than 0.05 should be significant. And so if the result is saying otherwise, it's your duty to help the author to point it out, right? Then you look for flaws to correct, identify methodological flaws, biases, errors, you know, highlight missing data. There's this thing that we often come across in research: inconclusive data or missing data, overstated results, sample sizes that are either over the projected sample size or under the projected sample sizes, and so on and so forth. So point those things out if there is any. And don't the purpose of a peer review is not to kill or is not to diminish that particular research, is to amplify the strength and also help to strengthen the weakness. So I use the word amplify the strengths and help to strengthen the weakness, because many people have the idea that once you're doing a peer review, you have to, it's all go for the jugular of the authors. Make sure that they don't, make sure that you critique them to an extent where, you know, they don't feel encouraged. To write a paper is very cumbersome, very, very tiring. If you have written papers, when you're peer reviewing, you also have to have some degree of, you know, objectivity but empathy in mind, right? Don't go for the jugular of the author just to make sure that you diminish their confidence or, you know, I like the idea of what they call positive peer review, a peer review that seeks to strengthen rather than a negative peer. Negative peer review is a peer review that seeks to diminish and critique and, you know, cause terrible rebuttals that will make the author not to even think of writing again. Okay, so looking for flaws, look for flaws to strengthen biases and errors, highlight areas of missing data. I've said that. Then also, as a peer reviewer, it is your duty to fact check, right? For example, we're all doctors. If I say that the left ventricle is anterior to the sternum, right? That might be a statement of error or a statement of omission or commission, intentional or unintentional. So the left ventricle is not anterior to the sternum. So as a as a peer reviewer, you fact check many of these things, right? Not only fact checking the correctness of things, you fact check the stated facts. For example, the author may have quoted somebody, or the author may have cited another paper. It's your duty to go and see whether that citation, right, whether that citation actually reflects what the author was saying, because the author may say, according to John et al., the incidence of heart failure in children is 10%, right? And people just buy hook, line, and sinker. But it's not, your duty as a peer reviewer is to actually go and see whether John et al. Stated that the incidence of heart failure in children is actually 10%. So you do lots of this fact checking, and then anyone you see that was not properly cited or cited in error or was an overstatement, you point it out, right? Then you make suggestions for improvements, very, very critical. Provide constructive criticism for clarity, suggest additional ways to present the fact, additional ways to strengthen the paper. And I've said that over and over again. Okay, if you also have pre-existing knowledge of that particular, or you're an expert in that particular area, you can suggest ways or new papers or new ideas or new facts that's to the authors that will help the authors to strengthen their paper. So to do peer review has a lot of advantage, right? As a peer reviewer, you're constantly, being nourished by new knowledge from new things, from new authors, strengthening your existing knowledge and understanding. And it also helps you, with analytical thinking, which we all, as physicians, require to, continue to progress in this career, right? And above all, I feel very satisfied trying to help my colleague, let me use the word, produce a scholarly paper, right? I feel, even though I don't know the person, I don't know about you, but when I see a scholarly paper, I feel very excited. I want to read it. I want to understand what it says, and then I make my contribution. And above all, we are all living to help this human race, right, in one way or another. What that person is doing from XYZ University or XYZ Academy may help a patient or population or health policy someday. It's something of pride to contribute to the growth, to the advancement of humankind, right? And then to authors, it helps them to strengthen their papers, provide validation and credibility. So if you peer review my paper and I get your peer review response back and it says that, oh, my writing, you did well, right? I feel encouraged to do more. I feel motivated to keep going in this race, in this very hectic but very pleasurable experience for clinical research. And then to the medical community, it ensures that we consistently keep producing high quality research, promotes continuous improvement and innovation, maintain integrity, which is very, very important, critical. Maintain integrity and trustworthiness of scientific research, right? And then lastly, as a peer reviewer, we also urge you to understand the need for confidentiality. You should not ethically plagiarize another person's job, right? So because they've not published, it does not mean you should take it and become your own. So maintain confidentiality. And if you know that there's a conflict of interest, for example, my wife should not peer review my paper because there's going to be obvious conflict of interest, right? My family should not peer review my paper because except my family is a specialist who declares that here is my family, but I have the specialty to do this, and I'm going to do it in a non-biased way, right? And then timeliness, conduct these peer reviews. If they send it to you, do it in a timely manner. It shouldn't take much time to do a peer review, but just do it in a timely manner to avoid delays because some people might be waiting for your feedback for them to be able to do this. And then provide constructive feedback in any form. You could do it by highlighting or making comments. You could do it by writing summaries of what you found. And then when you're writing your peer review response, make it as simple and as detailed as possible, right? So that the person who's the authors will clearly understand your observations and your suggestions to improve it, okay? Thank you so much. We'll be ending the recording today. We'll take questions. when the recordings have ended, and then we'll discuss other things. Stop share. Give me one moment.